Richard Guarasci.
Thank you, Karen. Well, it's a delight to be here. What a wonderful setting, and what a spectacular campus compact you have. I just finished with, and Karen was there as well, a week or so ago with the inaugural meeting of the new combined Maryland, D.C. campus compact, and equally powerful. Campus compact is alive and well and really surging at this point, as is the entire civic engagement movement. I was the past chair of the campus compact for New York State a few years ago, and watched that really grow and blossom as well. I was asked to just say a word or two about where I came from today. So you've been, Staten Island is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, and it's sometimes called the forgotten borough. It's the smallest borough, but it's 500,000 people. So it'd be like the 28th largest city in the country if it were a separate city, but dwarfed by the other 8 million people that live in the other 4 boroughs. But it's never received more attention than it has in its entire history, as it has this last week because of something you're all familiar with down here, a horrible hurricane that's really wreaked havoc and destruction and death all across one part of the island. A large part of the island is fine and just restored power recently, but a large part of the island, as you've probably seen on CNN and all these news shows, is really in harm's way. And like all your schools, we created an immediate response to it with relief efforts and recovery and rebuild. A work that's going on through something called WagnerCares.org, but lots of other actors are heavily involved in this work. So Staten Island will survive, but these 4 folks are still without power or homes. My students and my staff were down with the Salvation Army, taking hot food to the homes because people won't leave their homes, particularly the elderly. I mean, this sounds so familiar to you because you've been through all this with Hurricane Andrew and other hurricanes. It was an indiscriminate hurricane. It stretched 1,000 miles, and it went over a number of states, and it different than Katrina, which at least to the outsider appeared to be concentrated in one place predominantly or close into one place, and we think of New Orleans even though it was in Mississippi and other places. And it tended to be a hurricane that was associated, at least to the outsider, with black and white and rich and poor, or at least better off and poor. And this has been a different kind of hurricane. It's gone across all classes, races, all communities, indiscriminately. And so this sort of is out of the New York experience. It's not something we're familiar with in any way, shape, or form. This level, of course, we all lived through 9/11, which was a different kind of tragedy and a different order of things. But and much of this community, I want to tell you, on Staten Island, are made up of firemen and policemen, and lots of the families of these people suffered significant deaths and loss on 9/11. So, with that said, there's a lot of effort to rekindle the American spirit and the New York spirit of being resilient and fighting back and the like. But there is a great need. We somehow have to figure out how to house about 50,000 people across all of New York City, and in a way that makes some sense. And they're talking about all kinds of options, bringing in cruise ships to put people on, or it's hard. This is not a place, given the climate, to do a tent city. So it's going to be, we have to be innovative. But a lot of that is going on. Wagner College, just to say a word about it, because you probably said, where is that? Is that in Kansas somewhere? Where is that place? Wagner College is about 2,200 students. It's 1,800 undergraduates. It's a traditional liberal arts-oriented college. It has very strong professional programs in nursing and education and business and physician assistant and theater arts, but a strong commitment as well in all of the liberal arts and sciences and humanities. And as Karen had said, we put together 14 years ago a curriculum that made sense. This was a place that started in Rochester, New York in 1883, when 5 Lutheran ministers were concerned about what to do about all this influx of immigrants. So after the Civil War, the industrial corridor, probably, let's say, Syracuse across to Rochester to Buffalo through to Cleveland up to Detroit, was a major part of the economy of the United States. And so they were worried about what to do, particularly with German. They were German Lutherans, what to do with German immigrants. So they thought the best thing they could do is to start a high school seminary to produce more pastors to take care of more people. And that's how Wagner College was really born. It was born in Rochester, New York in 1883. One of its famous graduates, Frederick Sutter, sort of a boy wonder, became pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church on what was then an extremely rural Staten Island. And they put him on their board of directors at one point, and he said they wanted to start a college, and they wanted it to be a liberal arts college. They came from a certain strain of Lutheranism that really believes in the power of education to liberate people and the freedom of ideas. And so they had no place in Rochester to build this college. And he said, well, in Staten Island, there's a little bit of the Vanderbilt estate, and there's a little bit of the Kennard from Kennard Shipping estate, and we might be able to purchase 30 acres or something and put a college there. And they did, and that's in 1918 is when Wagner College was born. It was born on Staten Island as a college and was approved by the Regents in 1929 and went co-ed in 1933, which was unusual, and then left the Lutheran Church quite amicably in the late 1960s and has had good relationships and a strong interfaith across all traditions since then. I say all that because I went back to Rochester on the 125th anniversary. And you don't want to go there because I love Rochester. I used to live close by, but where the school was is now a gas station with the meanest dog I have ever seen or been acquainted with. So I still see that dog in my dreams as I approach the place, and I'm really happy we're in Staten Island. So let me just say tonight a few things about civic engagement. First, congratulate the awardees and the ones to come. I think the best work I've ever done in my life as a teacher, I still teach courses, the best thing I've ever done in my life has been to involve my students in civic engagement work, linking courses and community work together. It's been the most powerful immersion of deep learning and civic development and engaged learning that I've ever experienced in any way, shape, or form. And I've done living and learning programs and programs abroad and things like that. But this has just been remarkable work. And in fact, I'll just tell you one story that I hadn't planned on telling you. I was the dean of Hobart College at Hobart and William Smith colleges in what New York State folks who live upstate call Central New York, but those of us in New York City would consider Alaska. But I've lived all over the state. And so I was working, I decided that we needed to do a course. It was very early in this whole movement, and it was the early 90s, and I decided to do this course on community politics and service. And we were going to read all the work, significant, interesting work from feminism and from diversity and multiculturalism and critiques of it as well in this course, and really familiarize ourselves with what does democracy really mean at this moment. We read some classical work as well. And I was going to have my students volunteer at that time in a variety of agencies, and I had about 18 people in this course, and it was just myself as the dean. And so I put them in a variety, I've worked with some community people and put them in a variety of different settings. They were broken up into different settings. And this one young woman, I'll never forget it, really a bright, energized, thoughtful young woman, very, very confident and self-possessed, good values in terms of caring about other people, but pretty much an individualist in terms of making her way in the world. So she got assigned to a residential drug treatment center. We were not far from Rochester, outside of Rochester, and she thought she was going to go be working with drug addicts. It was a Catholic-funded drug relief program, residential program, and you had to commit to stay there for 3 months. And they were drawn from, it was for women, and they were drawn from cities around the state. So Albany, Syracuse, New York, Buffalo, and Rochester itself. And you could bring your children. In fact, I think you were required to bring your children. So it was this really intense kind of immersion program. And she thought she was going to meet this young student of mine, people her mother's age. Of course, she met, and all the women there were women of color, and she met people her age. It was stunning for her. And here we're reading all this work about democracy and diversity and coalition and some significant criticisms by Arthur Schlesinger and other people of this work, and whether it was ephemeral and not substantive and whether it was real. And they were grappling with these issues in class. And here she is now volunteering, working with this young woman. And the one thing I intelligently did in this class was I said, in addition to the papers and exams you're going to have on the material, you're going to have to write something I just invented at the time, because it just made sense to me. I said, you don't have to do an intellectual autobiography of how you put this work together. I want you to do what I called citizenship autobiography. And I want you to tell me how the reading and how the work in the community go together in shaping who you are becoming. That's all I said. It just sort of came to me. So I got some phenomenal papers you could imagine from the students in different ones. But from this student, I could almost quote it. I had this absolutely elegant piece of scholarship about how the work fit together and what authors had the most meaning for her. Audre Lorde and all these various authors were very, very meaningful to her. And how the work came together. And she wrote it towards the end. She said, here I was with this woman working with her and the like and her children. She was my age, and the accident of our births 21 years ago found us in the same place. Now, the accident of our births, of how she had a certain life she had to lead, and I had a certain set of privileges that I led and were afforded without realizing it. And here I was working with this woman, and we found we had so much in common that connected us, that, and I'll forget, this was her quote at the end, that I thought that night when we finally left each other after numerous meetings during the semester, I saw God that night. Well, when I read that as a professor, I have to tell you, I was so, because she was serious about this. And I didn't even think she was a religious student or had any religious particular profession at all. But it was such a powerful moment for her. And it taught me as a professor, I'm a political scientist, that what service learning could do, then we were into service learning, was that it could help create a culture of democracy by connecting people together who would never likely meet each other. Their schools were segregated, their communities were segregated, churches are segregated. They're likely not to work in the same places. They wouldn't likely have the same opportunities, and if they did, they'd be at different stations within those organizations. They're not likely connect in a way unless they would just had an unusual experience of one sort or another. But I realized that what civic engagement work does, starting with service learning, when it's done well and done properly, done responsibly, deep learning, deep engagement, a lot of reflection about all of it, what it really does is build what Ben Barber, famous political scientist, called the arts of democracy. It builds a democratic culture. It builds a sense of us and not me and you. It builds a sense of really the ability to see difference, understand it, and see connection, and also to understand, to begin to develop the skills of mediation and connection and coalition building, and hopefully if it's done at another level, action, common action together. So that really turned, I wasn't planning on saying any of this, but this sort of turned my head. As a professor, it sort of brought together a lot of my own theoretical work, my own practice privately, into a way that I said, this is the kind of teaching I want to do from now on. I want to be experientially located with students, and I want to be doing it around civic work. Well, we now sit at a very interesting moment. If we go back to the origins of Campus Compact, I think it was 1985, maybe I'm off by a year or two, when Father Healy and Father Hesburgh from Georgetown and from Notre Dame, and Frank Newman, wonderful educational reformer in his own right, when they put together something called Campus Compact, their goal, in fact, most recently quoted to me, was they just wanted students to vote. That's all they wanted to do. They were concerned that in the late 70s and early 80s, students had turned very inward, very self-centered, very materialistic. They were reacting to the prior generation of the 60s, and they sort of turned in a different direction. And they thought if they put something together that emphasized public service, that students would understand the notion of being connected to others in a powerful way. They didn't have a curricular notion or anything else. They thought if they got the presidents together, they could promote community service on our campuses, a necessary condition for the kind of work that we do. And then a generation later, maybe a decade later, we began to see the emergence of service learning. And service learning, in the model I just described, began to connect courses to experiential learning and civic engagement, highly criticized by a number of faculty members, advocated by others, criticized in administrative circles, advocated by others. A lot of folks in student affairs were pioneers in trying to fight for this, some faculty allies. I remember all those issues. That's why I did that course at Howard William Smith, because I was a dean. I figured if I did it, it sort of legitimized it. And But that was a powerful movement. When done poorly, as I was saying today to some folks, highly irresponsible, reinforces all kinds of stereotypes. You go work in the field that's required for this course. I'll see you at the end of the semester. Hand in a journal. Totally irresponsible to do it that way. You need to be involved and engaged with your students yourself in this work, and they need to really have significant articulations with community partners to understand what the obligations are in both directions. But that work advanced us, and then we moved to the notion of civic engagement, a larger notion of how universities and colleges could play a much more significant role holistically across the whole range of the college, not just an isolated course or two, but actually across the whole range of the curriculum and the co-curriculum and the extracurriculum in ways that would make sense and kind of build the notion of civic engagement as a value of the institution, as part of one of the goals of the institution, part of the mission. And now we've moved into sort of another moment. Building all of these things still exist, obviously, they're all simultaneous. And now we've moved to a notion that maybe we should collateralize and leverage this work in a way to really have full impact. And not just simply put students and faculty into the community where maybe they do some good on a one-to-one basis or a course to a particular segment of the community. Courses end, students leave, things disappear. But rather, let's really commit ourselves to be partnered with our local neighborhoods, be they rural, be they suburban, be they inner city. Let's really connect and partner with them in a way, in a true, small d, democratic partnership of equal relationships, but with the university or college as an anchor in those relationships in a way that can be not only do deep learning, but also have significant community impact with the community, aligning what I call the assets of the institution, our courses, our students, our faculty, our administrators, our staff, aligning the assets, the sustainable assets, with the problems of the community or the challenges, along with the assets of that community, because all these problem communities have assets as well. They have churches, they have good people of good intention, they have all kinds of things going on there that are significant, particularly within the not-for-profit community. So if we could align our sustainable assets that match up with those particular challenges, then we can really look at not only deep learning in the disciplines students are studying, civic development and civic leadership and civic competency of the students and of the community members. And then finally, true, measurable outcomes in terms of impacts around issues that we've decided together with the community to attack. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this tonight, but I just want to take one step back. I realize we have sort of an audience of different folks from different callings at the moment in the room, students, faculty, administrators, presidents, and what have you, folks part of the Campus Compact, staff, and the like. I did want to say that we're at a very interesting moment in higher education. There's a number of things which are crashing together, which create tremendous opportunities as well as tremendous challenges for us. So let me just put them into context for the moment, why it is a crucible moment, and this is the report, and this is the woman here who's responsible for this. I sat on a task force. Karen Musel wrote this report. This is one of the great documents of higher education called The Crucible Moment, College Learning and Democracy's Future. We should give her a round of applause for this. So let's just sort of set the table. Where are we? Okay, we had this big election. So where are we going? Where are we? Well, we're clearly as a country, and the work we do, we're in the middle of a political and economic sort of challenge, to say the least. We've got a fiscal crisis at the state level, at the national level, and at the local level. Dramatic challenges for all of us. All of us know that there'll be less resources coming in our direction in higher education, at least for a while, and we're hoping to hang on to the ones we have. So we're in a tough situation there to be able to afford students the kind of education that they deserve and also partner with our communities in the way that they are counting on. And secondly, we're in a political stalemate, the proportions of which we have seen only a few times in the United States. So we have no agreement, no consensus from our political leaders, and no particular willingness, hopefully these last few days have changed some things, but no particular willingness to really connect across ideological and other kinds of political differences. And then thirdly, we have this drumbeat, this absolute drumbeat of criticism of higher education, which attempts to argue that the only value of higher education is in preparing you for your first job, and that we can do it all in ways that are incredibly inexpensive and with a real lack of commitment, and that we're trying to reduce what has been a transformative experience for students into simply into a transaction. That you give us time and money and you get a credential. And that is not what higher education's been about. It's not what it was founded on. Both mostly public and all of private, all of public and all of private really have been about the civic mission as well as preparation for a career and a career that is meaningful. And finally, our local communities, our neighborhood communities, wherever your neighborhood is, are really, really hurting in ways that are going to be quite profound. And we see it in all sorts of deficits, in the challenges in K through 12 education, health disparities of significant proportion, economic inequality that rivals the level of wealth disparity that we saw before the income tax in 1916. I mean, it's really a moment for us in terms of all of these things are in the sort of context of which we operate. And then there are specific challenges for higher education that make it even more complicated, and the administrators in the room will tell you that these are things they live with every single day. First, we have the economic issues that face college universities of affordability for our students and their families, access to higher education, and at the same time a mounting series of challenges for us in terms of accountability, of demonstrating what we do, how we do it, in ways sometimes that is powerful, but in other ways which are debilitating because it just becomes a lot of bureaucracy. But those are one set of challenges for us. And then we have a demographic revolution going on. We saw it in the election. We're seeing it in all our campuses. You look around you, we look very different. Karen said it earlier in another meeting that when her grandfather went to college, and your father went to college?
No, he was born in 1902. 3% of Americans.
1902, 3% of Americans went to college, and now it's 60-some-odd percent, 70% of some kind of post-secondary education. So it's a very different world, and the demographic change has changed the way in which we operate on our campuses in terms of a commitment to diversity learning and diversity education, and all sorts of other ways that plays out on our campus to create a true democratic education for all of our students to connect with each other. And then we're going on to, we also have side-by-side now, a technological revolution, which essentially says that everything that's ever been said, written, or performed, you can have in your hand, which now says, what is class about? What is the classroom about? Where is the classroom? And what is it about? Okay, is it about the kind of acquisition of knowledge, or is it about the critical engagement of issues? And what is the role of the teacher in that kind of a model? And so that change is going on at the same time. And finally, the last one, which means this is why it is, to me, a crucible moment of all these things coming together, is that we're in a legitimization crisis for higher education. Newsweek magazine about, 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe a little longer now, had the cover of "Is College Worth It?" was the cover of their issue. It was actually only a 3-page article. I thought the whole issue was going to be about this. Now, the cover picture was of my main hall building of Wagner College. It didn't say Wagner College, which was a bit of a relief, okay? And it did spark quite a bit of social media response from my alums saying, well, we thought it was worth it, which was really made me feel very good. And I was able to tell my trustees, don't worry about this. This is what they think a college should look like, at least, so this is good. But this whole question of is college worth it? And what do we do? What's our social good? Are we just simply job creators, job generators, job preparers, or is there some larger mission? And we have lost our way, because I can tell you, since I was your age, for the students in college, and I was in college in the 1960s, we've been hearing on television, if you want to get a good job, get a good education. We've been selling this for a long time. So I don't have much patience with my fellow administrators and say, oh, isn't it sorry that we're being reduced to this reductionist mentality? We created some of it. We're responsible for some of it. But it's there. And so the whole notion, this whole crescendo of issues of having a legitimization crisis, an affordability crisis, a political stalemate, a fiscal crisis around us, and a business model, I'll explain this in a second to those who don't know what I'm talking about, a business model of higher education which no longer works. All right, I'm in the private sector. So in the private sector, particularly of more selective schools, what we find ourselves doing is increasing tuition, increasing financial aid, increasing tuition, increasing financial aid. And if you saw the report that came out just recently, for those of you, net tuition revenue, the amount of money we keep as college universities in the private sector, and I think in the public sector as well, after financial aid, after the institutional knowledge, for the last 3 years has been flat. That is, we've been increasing tuition, but getting no more revenue. So trying to do more with the same, in some cases declining revenue, trying to do more on the public side with less. I mean, the underfunding of public education is a disgrace. I said this as a private school president. It's an absolute disgrace. The notion that legislatures will not afford the precious gift that we have in this country of educating our youth to take leadership and responsibility and prepared for the next set of challenges we face is really abandonment of responsibility. But this is the model we face in public higher education: is legislatures won't support it, won't pay for it, and on the private side, families can't or are unwilling to pay for it as well. So we're in this other kind of broken business model situation. So I put all of this together, quite frankly, into one larger conversation, because I do believe there's a path out of all of this that links these issues together rather significantly. And I'm going to get to that right at the dessert part of my speech here. I don't want to give that away too soon. I do want to go back to the crucible moment. This is a document, for those who haven't seen this, for the students in the room. I want you to go on aacu.org, and I want you to download this or just look at it online. This is an incredible document about chronicling, first of all, the history of civic engagement in universities, the purpose of civic engagement, the definition of civic engagement, excellent models of how to do really first-rate practice of civic engagement, how to measure and account for it, well, how it's related to completion of coursework and graduation rates and retention of college students and their success. All of that is in this, and for $19.95 you get the Ginsu knives. No, I see I got carried away with your stuff. But I want you to read. I'm telling the students now. I assume all the administrators and folks who work at university colleges will read this or have read it or seen the little kind of summaries of it. But I want the students in the room to read this. This is a map, in some ways, of what's been going on, why it's important, and how to actually bring it to a higher level. And that's real. I really put that responsibility on you as much as anybody else. So this document argues that civic engagement is not an auxiliary enterprise of higher education. It is one of the central core pieces of our mission and one of the central core goals of an undergraduate education. That's a change to now say in the 21st century or even the 20th century that that's one of our goals. We want to be measured by this along with other things we do. And so that's a powerful message in this document, and it goes back and traces the origins of that from the very founding of higher education in the United States. And it really, as I said earlier, we move from this trajectory of the reinvention, if you will, of what we now call civic engagement, with the beginnings of Campus Compact in the early 80s, up to where we are now, where the notion is that now we can be involved in purposeful, intentional work with our community partners in a way that draws on all this other work of service learning and community service, brings all the pieces together, but then ties it together in ways with the curriculum and the co-curriculum to say we're working with our community partners in ways that serve not only their needs, but their learning as well, and aligns our courses in ways that makes the most sense to increase learning in the discipline as well as civic impact. And so these partnerships are really profound. I belong to something, Karen's been part of this, others have been maybe in the room, called Anchor Institutions Task Force. This is simply a group of institutions that started acknowledging the fact that we have these university partnerships and we are one of the anchors in our communities. Sometimes in smaller communities it's banks, colleges and universities, not-for-profits maybe, foundations maybe, hospitals. We are all anchors in these communities of need. In larger cities, it's a bigger kind of menu of potential partners. But I found at Wagner College after about 10 years of doing this work, of civic engagement work and service learning work, that I found a lot of it was episodic. Courses come, courses go. Students are involved, and they're not there. They're doing something else the next semester, or they're abroad, or things happen in their lives. They have to step out of school for a while. They have family needs, whatever it may happen. So it's episodic to the community. And you may make those transitions, as I referred to, and those connections, as I referred to in the first story I told you about my student way back at Hobart William Smith in the early 90s. But the reality of the situation is we needed something more powerful. I had looked up at the first election in 2008 of President Obama and said, well, how did that really happen? How did all those young people get involved? And my hypothesis as a political scientist was that all this service learning for the last 10 years got them involved in a way. It didn't get them involved directly in politics, but it got them involved with communities that they normally wouldn't. It got them to believe that they could have an impact. And of course, the technology came along at the same time to show them they could connect with each other through social media in a way that's powerful. So it was a tremendous opportunity. But I asked the question of my colleagues, have we changed any of the coefficients of inequality in these communities? We're doing all this work. Students are spending a lot of time. They're spending a lot of time in middle school and high school doing community service. Is it making a difference with our community partners? And I came to the sad conclusion that it wasn't making much of a difference. It wasn't moving the needle of opportunity and accomplishment in these communities. So I came to the conclusion, along with my other colleagues at Wagner, that we should put together 50% of all our effort into one community. Let's say 50% of our in one community. Align X number of courses that we're willing to get involved with our community partners. Align a certain amount of our institutional resources, not money, but other things that we do in one community. Establish a true democratic partnership with that community through steering committees and open meetings and the like. A lot of not-for-profits were in those communities. Get the banks involved, the foundations involved, whatever corporations were involved. Get them all involved in terms of trying to identify what issues were really accessible to us in terms of being able to sustain over a longer period of time a way to begin to affect this. And the issues are right in front of us. They're the national issues. Issues of health care. In our community, it's in this one community I'm going to talk about in a second, it's diabetes and obesity. Small business development, economic development. Issues of immigration are very strong, sustainability issues, and K through 12, of college readiness, of any kind of college, starting with K and all the way up through. So we said, okay, let's see if we can really put something together, and we put together something called the Port Richmond Partnership. Port Richmond is a piece of Staten Island that before the Verrazano Bridge, which you see at the beginning of the New York City Marathon that they run across that links Staten Island to Brooklyn, before that bridge went up in 1964, Port Richmond was the kind of commercial center of Staten Island. Now, and then probably Staten Island was 50,000 people. 40 years later, it's 500,000 people, and it's a different community. This community of Port Richmond is now made up of 60% Latinos. Most of them, the large majority, are undocumented. 20% African Americans who are largely dispossessed, I think, on the island and in this community, in that horrible cycle that never seem to get out of, from youth violence all the way through other kinds of pathologies. And then another 20% of white ethnic New Yorkers from various sites. Some of them are homeowners, a lot of them are renters. A lot of racial tension between the Mexican community and the African American community. A lot of tension with the white community. So on and so forth. So we said, and we get zero. I mean, if I get 2 students a year out of this community, it's more than I can remember when we started this. So it wasn't an admission strategy or anything like that. It wasn't a necessity. They weren't on our doorstep. They weren't a threat to the safety of the community, of the college, or anything like this. This was all mission driven. We just said, okay, why don't we see in this community if we can make something of a difference here, instead of isolated courses. So we formed a partnership. I have actually insisted on a signing arrangement in 2009 with a number of partners. Spent a lot of time, which is very unusual for me. I don't usually take time in trying to make change, but I took a lot of time talking to people, gaining their trust, finding out what the issues were in a more sophisticated way, and finding out if I had the right community. And I chose this community over a few others because I felt that, particularly with the Mexican community, they had strong families, and I thought there's something to build from. And I felt the churches in the community were also very positive in a way, so I thought we could connect across churches as well. I'm not a religious person, so it wasn't something that I felt comfortable with, just out of going to church. It was something I had to build. So we put together this coalition, and we started to put, and the faculty, of course, said, what is the president up to now? This is more work, we can't do this, it's on top of everything else he has us doing, on and on, the usual stuff. That's always the reason. I don't blame faculty, it's just always, and it could have been any constituency, it's going to be more work, it's good work, but we can't get there, right? So you begin to show people how they can take what they're presently doing and just point it in a different direction. And with a little bit of support, in terms of some infrastructure support, we could connect courses in a way and revitalize some of these courses and excite faculty deeply about what excited them in the first place, their subject disciplines that they love, and connecting their disciplines to real, on-the-ground problems, and have students engaged in this work in a way that they would learn so much more about their discipline with such a level of intensity, connect with people in the community, and the community itself would have access to people and resources in a way that would actually lift their spirits and bring them together across their differences. So we did the usual things of anti-bias task forces and all that sort of stuff, friendship dinners. I've gone to more friendship dinners in African-American churches and Latino storefront churches and traditional churches, trying to get people to just know who their children are and get their children to connect and things like that. But then we said, let's really move this. Let's link our nursing courses with our healthcare partners in the community and really try to say we can reduce diabetes and obesity by X% over X number of years. Let's link our teacher education program for starters to the K through 12 community in this community. We helped start 2 charter schools as well, but with the public schools and the charter schools, and link first our teacher education students with the students in these schools, link our faculties in teacher education together with their faculties, begin to link the other arts and sciences disciplines through the teacher education program to their natural partners in the high school. And because we have a graduate program in teacher education that's fairly sizable, let's link our graduate students with the parents of these children. Now, we have schools where there are children in the Mexican community where the children are very young and pre-K all the way up, who their parents speak they're from Oaxaca, so they don't actually speak Spanish. They speak a dialect, and that's what their parents speak. They're going to school and learn in English. And they don't speak well in either language as children. They can't get any help with any kind of out-of-school work. So can we use our Spanish majors to be kind of translators and involved with this work? So as you can see, the linkages across the discipline started. And of course, all the social sciences got involved. The arts programs got involved in terms of performative work. And the humanities got involved with storytelling and all this creative work on filmmaking and the like. Very exciting. So we began to say, okay, let's then take X number of courses and put them into K through 12. Actually, we actually put an office in the high school, in Port Richmond High School. It got so involved, and one of our staff members spends her time going back and forth between the 2 schools. And now we have a learning community on food, the history of food, that's taught in the high school and in the college simultaneously, these 4 courses that are linked across 2 institutions, and the faculty are linked together in terms of what they're learning and teaching and how the college students are engaged with the high school students and the like. And then small business development, we thought was going to be the hardest thing. This was not a natural thing for us as an institution, but we were able to find that our MBA programs and our undergraduate business programs were just absolutely perfect in terms of helping folks understand what a business plan is, what a market analysis looks like, what a strategic plan if they're that far advanced, what a capital budget looks like, how to write a grant, how to do their income tax, all these different things that our students are learning in accounting and marketing and management and finance, how they can employ that as they're learning it with these community partners who are really absolutely quite excited about the prospects. It's not an easy landing. There's a lot of mishigash I'm not telling you about, but there's a lot of, it's complicated, as you know. It's life, it's complicated, and there's a lot of pushback every once in a while, but powerful. So the point was, could we look up, and then on immigration services, this was a big one. This started as immigration services because we have lots of day laborers at the time who were just being picked up on street corners to work in someone's garden or taken to New Jersey across the bridge. They're not documented. They can't get back if they're not driven back. A lot of times people wouldn't pay them. They would just drop them off somewhere and say, you're out of it. So we did an economic justice coalition with El Centro de Inmigrante, one of our community partners. And again, our students in languages, in the social sciences, in the humanities, across really all the disciplines, became absolutely captivated. And this agency started to grow, El Centro, and it became an anti-poverty agency. It became a language development, translation, and also language acquisition program. It's gone on to do all sorts of other things. So the point was simply aligning what the college was naturally doing, our courses that we teach naturally, that our students take, X% of them with this community in an honorable, respectful way. We now have set up the following. We did a big after 3 years, we did an analysis. We brought in a company to do just a strategic plan with Wagner on the Port Richmond Partnership, a firm that just does university community partnerships. And we reaffirmed the fact from the bottom up. They did surveys and interviews and everything that we had the right issues and the partnership was valued, so we could go forward in a way with some confidence. So now we have what one of my professors called not a regular curriculum, we have a community-derived curriculum. So what we have are problems in the community that then link back to courses, rather than courses trolling in the community for service learning experiences. So these initiatives, each one is chaired by a faculty member, a student, and a community partner. And there's one in health, one in economic development, one on immigration, and one on what we call college development or pre-college development. And so the notion is that these are now led by the coalition itself and come back to the Center for Leadership and Engagement, and instead of saying the other way, are there community partners, we can put students in the field to do X or Y, they come back through the Center for Leadership and Engagement saying we need a course to build on the course that just ended so for the next semester, so the work will continue. And my students know if I'm in course A, the work we're doing now on lead poisoning in one of the landfills, that work will continue with another course that follows behind us. And if I want to continue to do that work as a student, I can do that in the co-curricular program because we established an entire co-curricular curriculum, so to speak, with a separate credential for students. So I say all that to say that this work is powerful, it's meaningful, it's very meaningful to our students and very meaningful to the community when done well. It's never a finished project. Some people think, oh, could we ever do something like that? We wonder, can we do something like that? Can we continue it? Because it's not about, it has to be institutionalized at some point. It can't be just about current leadership. It has to be something that is sustainable and part of what is said in the Crucible moment as a civic ethos. It becomes a defining aspect of what you do at Wagner College. So let me just say the last thing about, because I don't want to speak too long, the last thing about the business model, the model of how we organize and pay for education and how it relates to all this work, to show that I think it need not be simply an add-on or just a simple reorganization. So this is a little complicated, but this is what I think we have to think about. So we have to increase learning, measurable learning on our campuses. We're all committed to that. We know that high-impact practices like civic engagement, learning communities, living and learning programs, on and on, global education, all lead to high-impact practices when done well. But in civic engagement work and experiential learning generally, we have a chance to address the issue of increasing learning and decreasing the cost of educating a student. It's going to be a complicated, using some of the technology as well. It's going to be a complicated process that's not going to be invented overnight, but I think it comes down to this. We currently measure the value of education by seat time in a classroom. Right? Credit hours is about how many hours you sit in a room. That's the currency, it has been for a long time, of higher education. It was invented so that students in the College of Pharmacy, if they took a course in the College of Liberal Arts, could figure out what it was worth, so they measured it in terms of how many hours you sit in a room per week. And as we need to move away, at least partially, from seat time and credit hours to competency as a way of measuring learning and what we do. And competency lends itself beautifully to experiential learning and civic engagement. And you can begin to put together models of civic engagement not tomorrow, I'm talking about over the next 5 to 6 years, where in fact we have an army of young students who want to be in higher education. They don't necessarily want to be PhDs, or they don't necessarily want to be professors, but they want to stay involved in this work, and they want to keep on learning themselves. And they could begin to become, much like healthcare has developed, new kinds of occupations. Healthcare, very similar to higher education. It's one of the few industries like higher education and certain kinds of service industries where the more competition you have, price doesn't go down, price goes up. Some people call it the cost disease, where we're competing with each other and trying to rival each other with a lot of redundancy in higher education. But we could end up in healthcare, the response to that has been to not simply have doctors and primary nurses, but to have doctors and hospitalists and nurse practitioners and physician assistants and a whole range of new positions that are powerful. We teach these programs in our college universities, which are powerful for patients and have a way of moderating some of the cost structures in healthcare. And I imagine in higher education that we can begin to develop the same sorts, not adjuncts. I'm not talking about exploited part-time teachers. I'm talking about whole full-time personnel, but the configuration of professors and some of these new professions can be a different mix over time. And a lot of my generation is retiring away, so it's the perfect time to begin to think about remodeling in some way. And it has a chance for us to retain the dignity of our faculties and to retain the dignity of learning and marshal a whole new army of professionals who want to come into this work, link this work to the very mission of what our institutions are about, re-legitimize why we're a social good in our society, as well as a graduating institution that credentializes people, and that we have a chance to really reinvent ourselves around the core principles that were part of the original invention of higher education, the civic mission and the preparing of young students to be professionals, well-educated, informed workers and professionals in whatever they choose to do with their work life. And as Karen was saying in a different meeting, or maybe at this introduction, there's an important relationship that we tend to ignore in higher education and in the United States, and that is this relationship between democracy and work. So we have thought for a long time in elite liberal arts colleges. I spent a lot of my career there before I came to Wagner, in pure liberal arts colleges, that anything that had experiential learning attached to it was vocational and therefore somehow demeaning or lessening of education. It was vocational, therefore it was applied. And those on the professional side felt that liberal education had its head in the sky and didn't quite understand how to do things, how to build things. And the rendezvous of those two ways of learning, the breadth and depth of the human experience, which is lodged in the liberal arts, and the elegance of learning by doing in the applied world, bringing them together, we call this the practical liberal arts at Wagner College, is important. But the fundamental thesis is that there's a civic connection between the two. And the civic connection is that we're educating young people to become expert and leaders in their field, working with integrity and a sense of mission and purpose, and that there are constituencies and publics waiting for them and counting on them to do those jobs with integrity and with excellence, whether they be patients waiting for doctors or nurses, or families and students waiting for teachers and administrators, or folks in the business world who, after all, have to respect the needs of consumers and investors. Every one of our positions, every one of the things we train people to do or prepare them to do, have constituencies that are depending on them to do them well. And that's the civic connection between work and democracy. I call it, actually, I stole it from a wonderful philosopher and writer, Bill Sullivan, and he called it, way back when, civic professionals. I stole it because he was using it a different way. I give him credit for this every time I talk. I want a royalty for his book, actually. But Bill is a wonderful guy. But that's what we are doing. So there's no absolute inconsistency between the civic mission of what we're doing and the preparation for an economic life that we are doing as well. They are connected at the core, and that's what we have to understand as we do this work. So I salute all of you for doing this. This is a wonderful session. Thank you for letting me be part of this. The work of civic engagement that's chronicled in the Crucible moment, the work that you're doing needs to live. Our communities are desperate for new allies. And as President Obama said when he was elected the first time, we are the people we're waiting for. Well, that's what they're waiting for us in these communities, and our students are desperate to do something that's meaningful and has an impact on the world in an immediate sense. So it's a natural alliance. So this is a wonderful opportunity or moment for us to turn crisis into an absolute new commitment of higher education to civic development and economic development in our country. Thank you very much.